Do it like
Is that
this.
how we're doing
That
it?
is how we're doing it.
You're literally a podcaster, and you're complaining about headphones. It's actually part of your job.
Okay, guys, deep breaths. Should we do the podcast?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry,
Here we go.
sorry.
Welcome to the Sky News Daily. I'm Niall Paterson. Today we are in Liverpool for the Labour Party conference. And look, there is a rather different feel to events here than those we attended last week down in Brighton for the Liberal Democrat conference. The reason is pretty obvious. Labour is now the party of government, so the scale of the event, the security surrounding it, much, much different to that which we saw on the South Coast. It should be a victory lap for Sir Keir Starmer, given the thumping victory that he won in the general election only in June. Instead, as you will already know, it has become rather overshadowed by all the freebies that have been donated to the leader's office, his chief of staff's salary, and this general feeling that exists right now that everyone within Labour is perhaps just being a touch too gloomy. Now, of course, the Prime Minister's speech is not today, it's instead tomorrow. Currently, we are focusing on Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. She's been speaking to the party conference, and we're going to take you through our thoughts. Joining me from the Sky News stand, slap bang in the heart of the Labour Party conference, I have our political editor, Beth Rigby. Hi, Beth.
Hello.
And our economics editor, Ed Conway. Hiya, Ed.
Hi.
Well, before we come to you guys, let's just have a quick listen to some of what Rachel Reeves said, well, just a few moments ago.
In this hall, 1 year ago, I stated my intention that the next time I addressed you, I would do so as the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. Today, conference, you can consider that a promise fulfilled. In my first weeks at the Treasury, the true extent of the Tories' irresponsibility was revealed to me. £22 billion of spending plans this year that the previous government did not disclose. By taking the first steps on delivering another manifesto commitment, our promise, led by our Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, to introduce free breakfast clubs in every primary school across England. Today, I can announce that will start in hundreds of schools for primary school-aged pupils from this April ahead of the national rollout. An investment in our young people, an investment in reducing child poverty, an investment in a Britain founded on the talent and the effort of working people. That is the Britain we're building. That is the Britain I believe in. Together, let's go and build it.
Okay, well, that was the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, Ed Conway and Beth Rigby with me. Look, guys, well, what did you make of it? I was not underwhelmed by what I heard from Rachel Reeves, but I certainly wouldn't say that I was overwhelmed either.
It wasn't, I mean, in terms of actual news stuff, which is kind of, I guess, what we're mostly focused on, there wasn't much to write home about. There's a new industrial strategy. We're going to hear more about that in the next month. But I think if you were kind of looking at this speech and thinking, okay, this is where they are going to announce various policies which are going to kind of shift the dial so that all of those noises off about the economy, about the politics that Beth, I'm sure, will talk about, will just go away. No way. It didn't seem to do that for me. But that being said, you know, I was there in the hall, and it felt like a good reception, but that doesn't necessarily mean it shifts the dial and moves the narrative.
But I mean, Beth, a young person on the team said to me earlier that this was a speech all about the vibes, by which I took it to mean that it certainly wasn't all about policy.
For me, that speech was a metaphor for everything that is bedeviling this government at the start of their term. And what I mean by that is that we said at the time of the election that this would be quite a short honeymoon potentially, that the victory was large in terms of the seats but shallow in terms of public support. And for me, that speech was just a reflection of how difficult it is for the Labour government in the first 80 days that they've been in that. They were elected on a mandate of change, but actually the Chancellor stood up and said, we aren't going to be able to change much at all for the next 12 months, 2 years. Every single thing about the prize that she talked about in that speech, every single thing was about something that might happen
It's
in
miles
4
off.
to 5 to 6 to 7 years.
We did get a bit of policy today that had passed me by before, that we're going to get breakfast clubs in schools. Can someone explain that one to me?
So this is a manifesto pledge. That there are going to be free breakfast clubs in primary schools. What we got today, it's not an enormous thing in terms of the money, the overall pledge here.
But it would make a lot of difference.
But it would make a lot of difference, particularly, if you're looking at trying to get more people, into the workplace, if you're looking at trying to deal with child poverty, if you're trying to look at dealing with improving the kind of inequality we have in this country, this is the kind of stuff that really does make a difference. The issue that is today we only get £7 million worth of spending, so it's only a little pilot to see if this thing will actually happen. And I think it talks to this bigger thing, that it's not actually giving you one big policy today, it's giving you a promise of a wee policy next year that might well become the actual policy you were hoping for, who knows, years after that. And so it's certainly something, but it's not quite. It's nothing to write home about in fiscal terms.
Well, I'm just looking straight up at the slogan that defines this conference: change begins. As soon as I saw that, I thought that was incredibly curious, that we're not even at the point of saying that change is happening. We're at the point of this process beginning.
They've actually done lots of things in terms of trying to lay the foundations. I'm not borrowing Keir Starmer's language there, but in terms of trying to lay the foundations, be it in planning, setting up Great British Energy. They just announced that they are going to do an industrial strategy. That the issue they have got is that they are inheriting a country that voted for change, and they are basically saying there's no money and the way we're going to get it is through growth. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be pretty shitty for the next budget in the foreseeables. And
how does that make sense with Rachel Reeves' assertion that the age of austerity has not come back? And she was very explicit about that in the speech today.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things going on. I mean, the first thing is that you've got a chancellor that has sunk £9 billion of public funding into settling pay disputes, right? And that's part of where that £22 billion black hole comes from. And as she's there celebrating this with conference about we're giving people proper pay rises, the Royal College of Nurses announced that they have rejected the pay offer. And that is a metaphor as well, isn't it? It's a metaphor for a government that is sinking public money into something that they haven't resolved, for a start. And then they will use that to say, we're not going back to austerity because we're offering real-term pay rises. But it's almost like austerity for them is a sort of ideology of the former Conservative government under Osborne, which is we want to make the state smaller. That's what they argue Osborne wanted. And they're saying, well, we don't want to do that, so therefore we haven't got austerity. But you're like, yeah, but what about real-term spending cuts in the next year? So there's a disconnect, Neil, between kind of what they are promising the public and what the public are actually potentially feeling.
But, your question on austerity, what is austerity? I mean, there is no kind of straightforward definition for that. I think every government in the recent years has said they are disavowing austerity. I remember when Theresa May did it. The question, though, is are the numbers there? And, the reason I'm here as economics editor is to try and answer that question as to, okay, what was there that was substantial in this speech that actually will change the economy? I'll give you the answer in a slightly more long-winded way, which is to say, I was planning to come up here to make a little film about Rachel Reeves' speech. Mm-hmm. Now I may not be making that film because it turns out this is a slightly more political moment. It's not about the economics, it's about the politics. And that's your little kind of shorthand for why the political kind of difficulties that are embattling the government are still the big story and not my stuff, the economics.
Well, let's talk then about the politics. And in the speech, Beth, we did have Rachel Reeves certainly not shying away from the winter fuel payment. Some are calling it a scandal. Certainly, it's a bit of a mess for the party. I have to admit, I thought her defence, linking it to the £22 billion black hole, was pretty well received in the hall, but then again, you'd expect it to be, I suppose.
The winter fuel payment cut has not been well received broadly amongst the Labour base. I think there was a kind of vibe in the hall that perhaps wasn't being felt, certainly when we were sitting live on set, and like dozens of people had gathered around to watch that speech. There was no rapturous applause, as really? Rachel Reeves
That's
concluded.
Because I was inside and did feel quite...
No, there was no rapturous applause. Look, what was this speech politically aiming to do? It was, one, to reinforce the message that she is, and I quote her, an iron chancellor with, quote her, iron discipline, right? So it's like we were elected for the first time in 20 years because people trust us. Trust me is actually the word she used, on the economy.
I thought that was interesting.
And therefore, I am trusted on the economy. I will not break that trust. I'm going to make difficult decisions tick. Then she does I need to make difficult choices. And there, I've got the winter fuel stuff here, Neil. She says, I know that not everyone in this hall or country agree with the decision I take. I will not duck those decisions, not for political expediency, not for personal advantage.
So they're just going to ride it out?
They are going to ride it out. My understanding is they are full square behind this. I think it was discussed and agreed with Keir Starmer and the Chancellor, so both of them on the same page for that. And then there was quite a lot of admission that it has been so doom and gloom that actually, number one, it could shoot them in their own foot because it makes the consumer and business nervous. And two,
which is happening.
Yeah.
Which is happening. And two, that they need to actually tell a story about why they're doing it now. And there was a lot of that there, wasn't there?
Well, there was quite a lot.
Prize, I believe in Britain, I'm going to make it better. And really, you've got a chancellor that's standing up and she can give the rhetoric of change beginning, but she cannot put any meat on the bones because all of the change requires years and years and years of planning and growth, etc., etc. And it's a bit... it's a bit miserable, really.
But I think the challenge in terms of putting meat on the bones is also this kind of slightly more pedantic one, which is they are right now drawing up the budget, and she's not really supposed to divulge anything that's in the budget ahead of that. And I think that's kind of fair enough. I think the difficulty is, if we now have a government which wants to be more serious and more long-termist, and does that in an environment where us noisy journalists who are constantly asking, and we're used to getting something from the government or experiencing some soap opera, does that just create this vacuum into which you have the drama?
Guys, that seems like an appropriate place to just take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue to talk about the doom and gloom as being elaborated on by the Labour Party. Welcome back, our economics editor Ed Conway, our political editor Beth Rigby, both here with me in Liverpool for the Labour Party conference. And look, we were talking just before the break there about the way in which Sir Keir Starmer, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who we've been hearing from today, have described in such gloomy terms the situation we're finding ourselves in. Ed, you mentioned a moment ago that business and consumers are already beginning to pick up on that. In what sense?
Well, you just had some data through showing that consumer confidence has actually taken a dive. You've got a lot of businesses right now which are shutting down. People are struggling. Businesses are struggling in the face of really high energy costs right now. Around the world, we are going through a kind of industrial revolution, in this case, to try to go towards net zero, which is also an enormous opportunity. So it's not like there's that much time to waste when it comes to the state of the economy, because right now, if you want to try and save your car industry, if you want to have a battery industry, if you want to have all of these things that have been promised, you do need to start building it, or to start providing enough clarity and enough stability to business that they can say, yes, we're going to invest there. And talking to someone actually from business, just there genuinely is this wall of money. A lot of people want to invest right now, but they've been so nervous because of all of these different successive things, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the political drama, whether it's COVID, all of these things, and they've just held back. And they're waiting. They're waiting
for the industrial strategy specifically.
For the industrial strategy, and I guess also kind of to some extent for the budget. So there's just a little bit of actual detail. And so I found the speech to be, it was much more optimistic than the Rachel Reeves we've heard from the last kind of month and a half or so. So actually, I thought that was a bit better optimism-wise than expected.
But she was also punchier, I thought, after there was that curious incident just a few minutes into the speech, Beth, when we had the protester stand up in the middle of the conference hall. I couldn't quite work out what that was entirely about.
They paid the price for their incompetence, their dishonesty, and their rule breaking. This is a changed Labour Party, a Labour Party that represents working people, not a party of protest.
what he said, he was shouting something like, "We're still selling arms to Israel. I thought we were voting for change, Rachel."
I mean, and to be honest, it's less about what he said and more, I think, the manner in which she dealt with it, which I thought was pretty professional.
You're right, Neil. So what she did was she said, we're a change Labour Party that represents working people, not the party of protest. Big cheer in the hall. They're prepared for this and they've practised this.
But it certainly, I thought it carried through the rest of her speech. There was a punchiness that hadn't been there up until that point, and certainly the way in which she
got
concluded,
better. I think
there was fire in the belly there.
Yeah, and I think also, Ed, and I agree with you, I think that they ladled much more optimism into that speech. I think they've become very aware that there is loads of pain narrative, and I think she has tried to do this in the speech, which is go back to the mission of growth. And I think basically what the Labour Party will be looking to do into the autumn, while it gets bumpy, and it will, Neil, is that they need to sort of say progress checks on missions. So, you've promised to cut NHS waiting list, 40,000 more appointments. How are you doing on that? And they've got to just keep going back to the actual core of what they have promised the public. The difficulties in government is it is so easy just to get totally distracted or blindsided by events or missteps.
Well, let's focus on what Labour needs to do in the rather more immediate future, not weeks and months from now, but tomorrow. Sir Keir Starmer, of course, addressing the Labour conference. I mean, Ed, what are you expecting and what are you hoping for?
I don't know what I'm expecting from Keir Starmer. Part of the problem here, is that there are lots of big issues for the UK economy. We haven't grown as much as we could. We're losing a lot of the productivity race with other countries around the world. We're not investing enough. And part of that comes down to really boring stuff, like reforming the planning system. And actually, one of the things that Keir Starmer, I think, will be talking about a little bit is planning. And that is really boring, but really important. And it's the kind of stuff, making it easier for companies and indeed for individuals to build stuff. That is one of the biggest problems that we've had in this country, not just for years, but for decades. And trying to resolve that is not something you can just do a big bang on. Yeah. And this is, I think, part of the big issue for the Labour Party is that they've come into government. There aren't as many easy wins on trying to sort out the economy. So you're left with the boring, long-term stuff. And planning is something that will take basically 10 years to see a proper kind of payback from it. But while you're doing that boring stuff, you still need to be managing the political narrative. I think that's the difficulty.
Neil, I think Keir Starmer has a real political problem. Have you seen his approval ratings? Since the day
they're as bad as mine.
Prime Minister, they've dropped. I think they've dropped by 45
He's below Rishi Sunak
points.
now, isn't he?
He's now negative territory, below Rishi Sunak. I think the free gear kit being splashed all over the front pages when he is sold himself as a politician of integrity, putting his government into the service of working people. And I know it because I heard him say it dozens of times. So I think that there's a couple of things he now has to do. And I really think that actually the handling of the free gear stuff, the way in which it was kind of drip, 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 there were the football tickets and then the clothes, and they're still facing questions about that. So I think there's a personal challenge for him now that perhaps there wasn't ahead of all of that break-in.
Well, we'll find out tomorrow. Certainly he'll be smartly dressed for the speech. Ed Conway, Beth Rigby, lovely to see both of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And of course, Sir Keir Starmer's speech will be the focus of the Sky News Daily tomorrow, but that is your lot for today. We'll see you again then.